Okay, this video is working on mean, standard deviation, and then the mean for group data and the standard deviation for group data. So this is showing you how to use the formulas and to understand what the formula is telling you to do. So for step one, I know this does take a lot more time to do this by hand, but understanding the formula, working it by hand, will help you to start learning how to understand the formulas. So remember, anytime you see X bar, that means that you're talking about the mean of a sample. So X bar is the mean of a sample. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight as I go through, but before I do that, I'm going to pause the video and save my notes. Okay, so anytime you see X bar, that means the mean of a sample. Anytime you see this symbol, you're going to say the sum or add these up. So what are we going to add up? We're going to add up xi, which is just our data points. So this, let me fix my pen. This is xi. So what it's telling me to do here, and you may know that the mean is an average, and that's fine, but if you really want to understand how to read these formulas, you have to go through each part to see what it's telling you to do. So this part here is just telling you add up your x's, add up your data points, and then divide by n. Well, you may wonder what n is. Well, n is your sample size. X bar will always be your mean for a sample, and lowercase n will always be your sample size. So our sample size would be just counting our data points, which is 25. So what I did was I added all of my data points up in my calculator and got 731. And then I divided by my data points, my sample, the number of data points, which is 25. So my mean for my sample would be 29.24. So that is step one. Now this is step two, and don't let it scare you. I actually use the shortcut formula. If you're going to do this by hand on paper, the shortcut formula will be the best bet. But the hard part is cracking the code of the formula. So let's go through the formula. We know that what xi is. We know that's our data points. So the first part of your formula is telling you to sum up x squared. So you're going to have to square each value and then sum it up. Okay? And then you're going to subtract. Now what are you going to subtract? The sum of xi. So here it's saying add up xi first and then square it. Over here it's saying square it first and then sum it up. So here's what you need to do. Make you a column for xi and sum it up. Make you a column to square each xi. So here we have squared each xi. We said 45 squared is 2,025. 35 squared is 12,225. And I'm going to go down and I'm going to square every single data point. Now, what I need to do is, when I square all of my xi's, I'm going to add those up. So this number down here, this 24,000, is the sum of x squared. The sum of x squared. So that's that first part of your formula. So you're going to plug in the sum of x squared in the front. Now the second part of the formula is saying add up xi, add up all your data points, and then square them. So this is your first column where you, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Okay, there it goes. So it's saying add them up first, then square them. So that's going to be your first column. See where we added those up? I got 731. That's your sum of xi. That's the second part of your formula, sum of xi. And then the square goes on the outside. Now that is divided by 25 because remember we said our sample size, let me do this in a different color, we said n is 25. So that's why we plugged in 25 for n. And then we have this fraction bar. Here's the 25 for n. The last part is the fraction bar, and then n minus 1, which is 25 minus 1. Now we just have to do our math. I squared 731 and I got to 21,374.44. So now what you need to do is work the top, subtract, and then divide by 24. And when you do that, you should get this number right here. And if you want to, pause the video and see if you can get that number. Then you have to take the square root of that number. And once you get your answer, you have to round it to the second decimal place. Okay, for step 3, we're talking about finding the approximate mean of group data. So what you have to do here in step 3, I'm going to take something to separate so we can clearly see what's going on in step 3. Okay, so step 3, you're grouping your data. So you had to count to see how many was in each group. So I've got my frequencies. So let's talk about the formula here. Basically, what you're going to do is when you do group data, that MI is the midpoint of each group. I'm going to zoom in on this for a minute. And then F is the frequency of each group. So what you have to do is you have to take the midpoint and multiply it by the frequency and get those up. So let's start with the midpoint. The midpoint of each group is taking the two numbers, the smallest and the largest, and dividing by 2. So 10 plus 20. 20 plus 30 divided by 2. So here's our midpoints. 15, 25, 35, 45. I've already got my frequencies. How did I get my frequencies? Well, I just went and looked at the numbers and I counted how many data points there were that were 10 to under 20. So you can manually count those. Especially if you're not using StatCrunch or Excel, just manually count those. I can tell you that I actually went in StatCrunch and did a histogram with this problem. Okay, so we got our midpoints. We counted how many numbers were in each group. That should add up to 25, and it does because we have 25 data points. Now multiply. Look at your formula up here. Frequency times midpoint. So I do F means frequency, M means midpoint. So 15 times 5, that's how I got 75. And so forth. I multiplied across. Now we have to sum them because we have the summation in the front, the summation symbol. But what does it want us to sum? The product of the frequency times midpoint. So you have to multiply those together, then add them up. So that's how I got 765. So that is my numerator. My denominator in the formula is n, which is my sample size, which is 25. So my approximate mean is 30.6. Step 4 is the approximate standard deviation. To get that, it's kind of similar to the normal standard deviation, the longer formula. You're going to take each midpoint and subtract the mean that we just calculated of 30. Actually 30.6. Okay, so you're going to take your midpoint and subtract your mean. So let's do that. Our midpoints, remember, we got them earlier. You're going to subtract the mean. And whatever number you get for each of these, you're going to square it. Look at the formula. So I basically did 2 steps in one in my calculator. I subtracted, and whatever number I got, I squared it. It would be probably negative 15.6 squared. But anyway, so that's how you get these numbers. It's the difference between the midpoint and the mean that we just calculated, and then square it. Now, you have your frequencies. So the formula says once you square it, you're going to multiply it by the frequency. So I'm going to do 243.36 times 5 and keep going, 31.36 times 7, and do this for each row. And then since we have this summation up here, we're going to add what we get up, and that is 2816. So that is how you get your numerator. You took the midpoint of each group, subtracted the mean, and squared it. Then you added it up. Sorry, you didn't add it up yet. You multiplied it times the frequency, and then you add it up. Because you have to go in order of operations. We don't add until we do our exponent, we do our parentheses, then our exponent, and then we multiply. And then once we do that, we add those together. And then the bottom's easy because it's just n minus 1. We know n is 25, and 25 minus 1 is 24. So you divide that, and that's how I got this number here. It's repeating, and I took the square root of it, and the standard deviation of my group data is 10.83. Now, this was a very long video, and the reason it is because I just showed you how to do this entire problem by hand, and I will show you the problem. It is actually 3.4.35. The last part, D, explain the difference in the results. Well, our results were a little bit different, so the results from part A are going to be more accurate, because part C, we just did the midpoints of the groups. So it's not going to be as accurate as taking the actual data points and calculating your mean. And just let me know if you have any questions. I know this was a lot of information.